In the summer of 1970, the streets of America sounded different. Camshafts thumped through open exhausts. Rear tires screamed for mercy. Neighborhoods trembled as muscle cars prowled through intersections. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, a Buick was doing something nobody expected. It wasn't a Corvette. It wasn't a Hemi Charger. It wasn't a Boss Mustang with racing stripes and attitude. And it definitely wasn't supposed to be the most terrifying torque monster GM had ever built. But it was, because buried under the hood of a Buick GSX sat an engine so brutally powerful, so wildly torquey, that even General Motors struggled to control it. The Buick 455 Wildcat. On paper, it looked tame, just another big block V8 from the golden age of muscle cars, another Detroit pushrod engine with a 4-barrel carburetor and chrome valve covers. Nothing special, or so everyone thought. But what almost nobody realizes is that this engine produced more torque than almost anything Detroit had built. More than the Chevy LS6, more than the Pontiac Ram Air 4, even more than Chrysler's legendary 426 Hemi. And the crazy part? Buick never meant for it to become a monster. They never intended to embarrass the competition. They never planned to build a tire-shredding beast that would terrify insurance companies and amaze drag racers. It just happened. So how did a luxury-focused division of GM accidentally build one of the most savage street engines of the muscle era? To understand that, we need to go back to the late 1960s, when Buick engineers were trying to solve a very different problem. Because Buick wasn't trying to win drag races. They weren't chasing trophies at Pomona or Englishtown. They were trying to build the smoothest engine in America. In 1967, the muscle car wars were exploding across Detroit. Every manufacturer was locked in a horsepower battle that seemed to have no ceiling. Chevrolet had the 396 and 427 big blocks. Pontiac had the 400 Ram Air. Oldsmobile had the 442 with the 400 Rocket. Ford was pushing the 428 Cobra Jet, and Chrysler had unleashed the Street Hemi. Magazine covers screamed about horsepower wars. Drag strips were packed every weekend. Young buyers wanted raw power and aggressive styling. But Buick? Buick had a reputation to protect. Their customers were different. Older, more established, more refined. They expected quiet power, smooth acceleration, effortless cruising down long highways. They wanted to feel the power without hearing it scream. Buick buyers didn't want engines that revved to 7,000 RPM. They wanted engines that felt like a tidal wave of torque, silent force, invisible strength, the kind of power that pushed you back in your seat without any drama. So Buick engineers began developing something new. Something that would satisfy their traditional customers while also giving younger buyers a reason to visit Buick showrooms. A massive big block V8 designed not for racing, but for effortless power. The result arrived in 1970, the Buick 455 cubic inch V8. And on the surface, the specs didn't seem radical. Nothing about this engine suggested it would become legendary. The engine used a 4.3 125-inch bore and a long 3.90-inch stroke, creating a displacement of 455 cubic inches, or about 7.5 liters. Compression ratio? A healthy 10.5 to 1. It used large wedge-style combustion chambers and massive valves. Intake valves measured 2.125 inches, while exhaust valves were 1.75 inches. Nothing unusual for the era. Standard big block dimensions, conventional 2-valve per cylinder design. But here's where Buick engineers did something different, something that would change everything. Instead of building a heavy racing engine like Chevy's 454 or Chrysler's Hemi, they designed the 455 to be light. The block used thin-wall casting techniques that dramatically reduced weight. Buick engineers had spent years perfecting this technology, and the 455 was their masterpiece of efficient design. A fully dressed Buick 455 weighed about 600 pounds. That's nearly 150 pounds lighter than a Chevy big block. Think about that for a second. 150 pounds less weight sitting over the front wheels. Better weight distribution, improved handling, and the engine still displaced 455 cubic inches. But that wasn't the only advantage. the engine also had an extremely long stroke, which meant one thing: torque. A lot of torque. See, engine designers have always known that long-stroke engines produce torque at lower RPM. The longer the stroke, the more leverage the crankshaft has. And the Buick 455 had one of the longest strokes in the industry, 390 inches. That's nearly 4 inches of piston travel with every revolution. And when Buick installed this engine in their high-performance GS models, something surprising happened. It didn't just produce torque, it produced ridiculous torque, the kind of torque that made experienced drivers nervous. Officially, Buick rated the 455 Stage 1 at 360 horsepower. But horsepower numbers in 1970 were often conservative. Manufacturers deliberately underrated engines for insurance purposes. Nobody wanted their customers paying outrageous premiums, so the real horsepower was likely much higher. But horsepower wasn't the headline here. The real shock came from the torque rating: 510 pound-feet of torque. Let that sink in. In 1970, the legendary Chevy LS6 454 produced 500 lb-ft. The 426 Hemi produced 490 lb-ft. The Pontiac Ram Air 4 produced 430 lb-ft. The Ford 428 Super Cobra Jet produced 440 lb-ft. But the Buick 455, 510, more than all of them, every single one. And it delivered that torque incredibly early, around 2,800 RPM. Meaning, the moment you touched the throttle, the car exploded forward. There was no waiting for the power to build. No need to wind the engine out. You didn't need to rev it. You barely needed to try. The engine just pulled, like a freight train leaving the station. Unstoppable momentum from the moment you pressed the accelerator. And when Buick paired it with the GSX Stage 1 package, the results shocked everyone. Because suddenly, Buick wasn't building a gentleman's cruiser anymore. They had built a street monster. Car and Driver tested a 1970 Buick GS 455 Stage 1. Their professional drivers had tested hundreds of muscle cars. They thought they knew what to expect. They were wrong. Quarter mile, 13.4 seconds at 105 mph. That might not sound insane today. Modern V6 family sedans can match those numbers, but in 1970, that made it one of the fastest production cars in America. Faster than most Corvettes, faster than many factory drag packages, and the craziest part? It did it almost effortlessly. Drivers reported the car would annihilate the rear tires with the slightest throttle input. Even rolling starts produced tire spin. Even light acceleration broke traction on dry pavement. One Buick engineer later joked that the engine produced so much torque it could twist the drive shaft like a pretzel. He wasn't entirely joking. But the real magic was in how the engine made that power. Because Buick engineers had focused on airflow and combustion efficiency rather than raw high RPM horsepower. The Stage 1 heads featured improved ports and stronger valve springs, allowing the engine to breathe better at higher RPM. The ports were carefully shaped to maximize velocity at low and mid-range RPM, exactly where street drivers needed power. They also installed a more aggressive camshaft with carefully selected lift and duration figures. This cam was designed for maximum torque production, not peak horsepower. The high-flow Rochester Quadrajet 4-barrel carburetor sat on top, feeding the massive engine with a perfect fuel-air mixture. And the intake manifold was designed for maximum torque delivery rather than peak horsepower. Every component worked together to create that brutal mid-range surge. The result was devastating. From about 2,000 to 4,500 RPM, the engine delivered an unstoppable wave of acceleration. Plant your foot and the car simply launched forward. No hesitation, no waiting, just immediate, violent thrust. Magazine testers described it as effortless violence, and that description stuck. But there was a problem. Actually, several problems, because the same things that made the 455 Wildcat incredible also made it difficult to control. First, traction. In 1970, most muscle cars used bias ply tires. These tires had been designed years earlier when engines produced far less power. They simply couldn't handle the torque of the 455. Drivers launching a GSX often found themselves spinning violently through first gear, and sometimes second. The tires would break loose again and again, no matter how carefully you tried to modulate the throttle. Even experienced racers struggled to hook the car up. Drag strip veterans who had mastered Hemi and LS6 cars found the Buick's torque delivery completely different. The power hit so hard, so early, that conventional launch techniques didn't work. But traction wasn't the only issue. The engine's immense torque also punished driveline components. Transmissions failed. The turbo Hydromatic 400 automatic was tough, but even it struggled under repeated hard launches. Rear differentials broke. The 12-bolt rear end would sometimes crack under the strain. Drive shafts twisted under load. Mechanics began seeing unusual damage patterns. U-joints wore out prematurely. Mechanics began reporting unusual wear patterns after hard use. Cars that looked fine externally were suffering internal damage from all that torque. The powertrain simply wasn't designed for that much low-end force. And then there was the weight transfer. Because when the Buick launched hard, the rear suspension squatted dramatically. The car would hunker down aggressively, transferring weight to the rear wheels. Front wheels lifted. Sometimes they lifted enough to affect steering. The steering got light. Drivers reported that the front end felt disconnected during hard acceleration. The car felt almost unstable during aggressive acceleration. It took skill to manage. Drivers loved the raw power, but controlling it was another story entirely. Still, Buick wasn't done. Because in 1970, they released the ultimate version of the engine, the 455 Stage 1 Wildcat. This version featured stronger valve springs rated for higher RPM. It had improved cam timing optimized for maximum torque production, and it used higher airflow heads with better port work. Every component was chosen to maximize that brutal mid-range punch. Officially, it still produced 360 horsepower and 510 lb-ft, but many historians believe the real horsepower was closer to 400. Some dyno tests from the era suggested even higher numbers, and when properly tuned, some drag racers were pushing these engines beyond 450 horsepower with minimal modifications. Headers, ignition timing, and carburetor tuning could unlock shocking additional power. At the drag strip, the results were incredible. Private owners reported quarter-mile times in the high 12-second range. With nothing more than sticky tires and a skilled driver, these cars were running with purpose-built race machines. One GSX driver reportedly ran 12.5 seconds at 110 mph with nothing more than slick tires and minor tuning. For a nearly 4,000-pound street car with full interior and air conditioning, that was shocking performance. Professional drag racers took notice. Some began building dedicated Buick 455 race engines, discovering that the design responded extremely well to performance modifications. But just as the Buick 455 was hitting its peak, the world began to change. Because in the early 1970s, several forces collided at once. Insurance companies began cracking down on high-performance cars. They had compiled statistics showing young drivers in muscle cars were expensive risks. Premiums skyrocketed for vehicles with big engines. A young buyer might pay more for insurance than for the car payment itself. At the same time, the Clean Air Act of 1970 introduced strict emissions regulations. The federal government was demanding cleaner exhaust gases, and high-compression muscle engines like the 455 suddenly faced a new enemy: unleaded gasoline. The original 455 ran 10.5.1 compression, which required high-octane leaded fuel. The lead in the fuel prevented engine knock and allowed high compression ratios. When lower-octane unleaded fuel arrived, engines began knocking and losing power. The high compression ratios that made these engines powerful were now causing damage. Manufacturers had to respond quickly. By 1971, Buick dropped the compression ratio to around 8.51. The engine could now run on unleaded fuel without knocking, but the price was steep. Horsepower ratings fell dramatically. The once mighty 455 now produced far less power than before. The brutal mid-range torque was diminished. And then came the final blow. New SAE net horsepower ratings in 1972 made engines appear even weaker. Previously, manufacturers had advertised gross horsepower numbers measured on engine dynos with no accessories. The new net ratings measured power at the flywheel with all accessories installed. The same engine that once claimed 360 horsepower suddenly looked like it made barely 250. The muscle car era was collapsing, almost overnight. Production numbers tell the story. In 1970, Buick produced only about 678 GSX models total. This was already a limited production vehicle, aimed at serious enthusiasts. Of those, just around 488 received the legendary 455 Stage 1 engine, fewer than 500 cars. Today, surviving examples are extremely rare. Many were crashed, raced to destruction, or simply neglected over the decades. Collectors now pay well over $100,000 for pristine GSX Stage 1 cars. The best examples with documentation and original engines command even higher prices. And the 455 engine itself? It has become one of the most respected big blocks of the muscle era. Not because it had the highest horsepower, other engines claimed bigger numbers, but because it delivered something else. Relentless, unstoppable torque. The kind of power you felt in your chest. Even today, engine builders admire the design. The long-stroke crankshaft creates massive leverage. The massive displacement provides huge airflow potential. The efficient combustion chambers burn fuel effectively. The lightweight block makes installation easier. These engines respond incredibly well to modern upgrades. Contemporary technology can unlock power the original engineers never imagined. With better heads, modern camshafts, roller lifters, and improved fuel systems, some modified Buick 455s now produce 600 horsepower and over 600 lb-ft of torque, all from a design created more than 50 years ago. But perhaps the most fascinating part of the story is this. Buick never intended to dominate the muscle car world. They weren't chasing racing glory like Ford or Chrysler. They didn't have factory drag teams or NASCAR programs. They were simply trying to build a smooth, powerful luxury engine, something that would satisfy their traditional customers while attracting new buyers. Instead, they accidentally created one of the most ferocious torque monsters Detroit had ever seen, an engine so strong that even GM struggled to control it. And that's why the Buick 455 Wildcat still fascinates enthusiasts today, because sometimes the most legendary machines aren't the ones designed for war. They're the ones that become unstoppable by accident. The Buick 455 didn't just power muscle cars. It redefined what torque felt like on the street. 510 pound-feet, at barely 3,000 RPM. That kind of power doesn't ask for traction. It demands it, and that's exactly why the Buick 455 Wildcat remains one of the wildest engines Detroit ever built. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most brutal engines of the muscle car era, let me know in the comments which legendary engine you want to see next, and make sure to subscribe, because the next story might be even crazier.